Good afternoon. I'm Claire McIntyre, President of the League of Women Voters of Greater Rockford. Thank you for joining us today. We do have some elected officials who have joined us, and I would like to acknowledge their presence. First, we have Senator Steve Stadelman, the 34th Illinois District Senator, Representative Maurice West of the 67th House District, Elizabeth Lindquist, Roscoe Township Trustee, Susan Petty, Roscoe Village Board Trustee, Mustafa Abdal, Rockford Township Trustee, Gina Meeks, Rockford Alderman, 12th Ward, Mark Bonney, Rockford Alderman, 14th Ward, and Janessa Wilkins, Rockford Alderman, 7th Ward. We also welcome Dr. Allison Hout. She is the president of the League of Women Voters of Illinois. Sorry, Allison. Our goal today is to educate area voters about the recent changes to our Illinois and congressional maps and to provide some information on redistricting. Redistricting can empower voters, but can also reduce their effectiveness as voters by how districts are drawn. The League of Women Voters of the United States advocates for a fair and transparent process that produces the most representative maps. I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Kathy Tate-Brandish. Kathy has been a member of the League of Women Voters since the 1980s and is an excellent, experienced moderator. She is also the co-founder of an HIV prevention organization in Kenya. Kathy?
Oh, thanks so much, Claire. Welcome to everyone on this sunny, unseasonably warm day. It's a pleasure to have you all here. We are in terrific hands with the League of Women Voters of Greater Rockford, and I have the distinct pleasure of introducing your two stellar panelists today. Paula Lawson is a League of Women Voters of Illinois Redistricting Issues Specialist and a member of the League of Women Voters of Illinois Issues Committee. She attends Illinois Redistricting Collaborative meetings on behalf of the League and guides the League's activities on redistricting. These activities have included educating local leagues about redistricting, organizing petition drives for the Independent Maps constitutional amendment, and encouraging local leagues to contact their legislators about redistricting issues and to testify at redistricting hearings. Madeleine Doubek is a passionate longtime advocate for improving government and politics in Illinois. As the former vice president of policy at the Better Government Association, she was responsible for a new law that limits golden parachutes for public executives. She also worked to stop efforts to limit government transparency and championed laws that boost government efficiency. Doubek writes a government-focused column for Crain's Chicago Business. Prior to her direct advocacy and policy work, Doubek spent 32 years in journalism, many covering local and state government and politics. She's won several regional and national journalism awards during her career. Doubek previously served as publisher of Reboot Illinois, a citizen-focused website covering state politics and government. Before that, Madeleine was the assistant vice president and executive editor of the Suburban Daily Herald. She served as the state's political writer, columnist, and editor for many years. So, Madeleine, let me ask you to take this first question first, and Paula, jump in at any time, and the same will go for all of the questions that I ask you. So what is redistricting, and what are the rules for drawing district maps? Also, how is gerrymandering different from redistricting? Madeleine?
Thanks, Kathy. And thanks to everyone for hosting us today and for being with us. Redistricting is an exercise that we go through every 10 years after we take a census and adjust essentially for population. We redraw all of our district boundaries. In Illinois, the state constitution says very specifically that the Illinois legislative districts, that is our state house and our state senate districts, must be compact, contiguous, and substantially equal in population. And so in Illinois, the power to do that lies in the hands of our state lawmakers and the governor. When it comes to congressional districts, the Illinois state legislators and the governor also draw those districts, and those districts must be almost precisely equal in population. There is a distinction there. When it comes to state legislative districts, legal history has allowed for about a 10% deviation in population among districts. Anything beyond that is usually found to be problematic. Now, what's the difference between redistricting and gerrymandering? Well, quite simply, gerrymandering is the practice of drawing those districts to one party's advantage over the other or not. Really kind of skewing the districts to take partisan advantage of them. And that is what we have tended to see across the country and here in Illinois.
Thanks, Madeleine. Anything to add to that, Paula?
Yeah, the only little thing I would add is that in Illinois, for the state legislative districts, we're required to have 2 state representative districts nested within 1 Senate district.
Okay, thanks. And then Paula, would you take this one first? How much input did citizens and organizations have into the redistricting process? Was there accommodation for non-English speakers or differently abled people?
Okay, so to start out with, we had 2 maps that were drawn for state legislative districts. So the first maps were drawn and voted on the end of May. They used American Community Survey data instead of census data. So anyway, those maps, and that was, I just want to mention that that was really done to get in under a June 30th deadline so that the legislature and the governor could approve maps. If they hadn't done it by then it would have gone to a redistricting commission that would have had both Democrats and Republicans on it. So the first set of maps, there were about 60 hearings that were held before the maps were actually passed. And then the second set of maps that was done the end of August after the census data came out, there were really only about 8 hearings. The problem really was with the hearings is that it seemed like the legislators were there to listen. They were there to hear what people said, but they didn't really listen and respond and incorporate information that was given to them. For example, the United Congress of Community and Religious Organizations, which includes Black, Latino, and Muslim organizations, presented a unity map maximizing minority districts. And they didn't receive any feedback on the district maps that they drew. So we felt in large part that the legislators were to listen but not comment. Both in May and August, the final bills that were introduced to the Illinois General Assembly, they were introduced about within 24 hours of the time that they were passed. So the public did not have any time to examine and respond to the final map proposals. Now, the congressional hearings were held in October during the veto session, and it seemed like there was some attention paid to the public. The first set of maps that was drawn only contained 1 Latino majority minority district, and by the time we got to the 4th set, there were 2 Latino majority minority districts. So I would say that there was a little bit more give and take in that process, but still not everybody was listened to.
Thanks. Madeleine, anything to add to that?
The League of Women Voters of Illinois and Change Illinois participated in most, if not all, of these hearings. And I was extraordinarily disappointed to see that most of them were held during the day when most people are busy at work and cannot attend. They were not very well publicized. There really were no accommodations made for non-English speakers or otherly abled people. And as Paula has pointed out very eloquently, there really was a very strong sense among groups who were trying very hard to have input and be heard that they were essentially, their direction and pleas were falling on deaf ears.
Thank you both. All right, here's one there's gonna be a lot of numbers in it, so pay attention and you can, either one of you take the first crack at this. So Winnebago and Boone counties have been represented by the 34th and 35th Illinois Senate districts and the 67th, 68th, and 69th Illinois House districts for decades. But the new maps add the 45th Senate district and the 90th House district. So how does majority influence affect reconfiguration of districts? Anybody?
Well, I would say in Illinois, if there's just a political party that controls the House and Senate and the governor's office, they really have control over drawing the map, complete control over drawing the maps. So so this is really allowed, you know, in 2020, in 2011 and 2021, where that was the case, where one, you know, the majority was held both in the legislature and the governor's office by one party. There's really, they really drew the maps. And in 2011, the Democratic majorities in the House were 73 to 45 and 41 to 18 in the Senate. So I believe mostly changes were made to maintain or increase majority party districts and protect certain incumbents.
That's exactly right, Paula. And, you know, I would point out that this is something obviously that both political parties do. You know, I, as a reporter, covered the 1990 redistricting cycle, and that was the last time in Illinois when Republicans for a brief time had control and had a majority, and they gerrymandered just as the Democrats have done in the state since, with control of usually both chambers of the Illinois House and Senate, if not the governor's office. It's really, you know, something that suppresses votes, frankly. They draw these crazy looking districts sometimes that don't seem very compact. If you look at this congressional map, you'll see some pretty crazy looking stuff. We have a district here that goes literally from the western edge of the state to the eastern edge of the state. We have this crazy looking, snaking looking district here in central Illinois that goes down into southwestern Illinois, stringing together several urban areas. And this is really a classic definition of gerrymandering.
Thank you. Madeleine, would you take this one? Can you explain what cracking and packing mean? And how much did these affect the Illinois maps?
Sure. So cracking and packing are terms that are used to describe a form of gerrymandering. If you want to, for instance, if you're part of a Democratic supermajority and you want to make it difficult for Republicans to win seats, you can take a strong area that has voted historically in strong Republican numbers and crack it up and splinter it into several different districts. Or for instance, if you wanted to limit the number of districts that could possibly, for instance, elect a Black official, you could take a concentrated Black community and make sure that it is packed into as few districts as possible to limit the voting power and voting influence of that community.
Yeah, and I was going to say, there in the second set of maps that the legislature passed, there was a lawsuit done by the East St. Louis branch of the NAACP, and they argued that the Black areas in and around East St. Louis could have been, they could have had a Black majority district, but that area was deliberately broken up and sliced across several House districts. And they argued that it was in order to protect 2 white Democrat incumbents rather than have the Black community together in a district.
And the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund also filed a lawsuit against these state legislative maps. And essentially their argument was that there could have been many more districts created that would have elected Latino officials. And so their contention was that their voting power was being diluted. And in fact, the Hispanic population in the state of Illinois has increased, as has the Asian population. In certain areas, the Black population in the city of Chicago and Cook County in particular has decreased. And unfortunately, a 3-judge federal panel found that the Democrats' contention that they were doing that for partisan purposes was perfectly legal. So those challenges to those state legislative districts were allowed to be dismissed and fall by the wayside. And so we have these maps now that will exist for this next election that we have coming up in June.
Mm-hmm. So Paula, so there were court challenges to how the maps were drawn. Besides what Madeleine just told us about, what were there others? And do you anticipate further court challenges?
Okay. Yeah, I might repeat a little bit, but yeah, there were several court challenges, and there were ones against the first set of maps done by Maldeff and the Republican legislative leaders, because the first set of maps was based on the ACS population estimates, and that violates the U.S. Constitutional 14th Amendment equal protection guarantee of 1 person, 1 vote. Those lawsuits became moot when the second set of maps were drawn and approved the end of August. The new set of maps, also there were also lawsuits, and there were 3 groups that filed those suits, and they were Republicans, Maldeff, and the East St. Louis branch of the NAACP. They submitted proposed changes to the maps that were passed by the Illinois General Assembly that would have created more Latino Black majority districts in Cook County and the Metro East region. All 3 lawsuits claimed that the September maps violated Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by diluting votes of minority citizens and by preventing such citizens from participating equally in the political process and having an opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. But on December 30th, 2021, a 3-judge federal appellate court panel rejected all the plaintiffs' claims that the most recent drafted legislative maps are racially gerrymandering. They finded that partisanship rather than race predominated in the configuration of the challenged districts, and the plaintiffs did not otherwise establish a violation of the Voting Rights Act. So to me, this kind of brings up kind of an important point that since June of 2019, when the Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision called Rucco versus the League of Voters of North Carolina, they really said that the state had no part in determining political maps, so that they do not rule on partisanship. So there are some states that they have it in their constitution that maps cannot be, gerrymandered in a partisan way, but Illinois does not.
And let me take a little point of personal pride here and point out that the League of Women Voters that Paula just cited, but also across the country. If you look up cases that fight sort of voter discrimination, you'll see many state leagues of women voters that are bringing lawsuits and have been for the past decade or so across the country. So there have been map challenges in other states as well, states such as Pennsylvania, Maryland, et cetera. Recently, the Supreme Court temporarily overturned a lower court decision to throw away newly drawn redistricting maps in Alabama. What kind of implication could this have going forward? Either of you.
So I'll jump in, and Paula, sorry I jumped ahead of you on that last question. You know, the concern, as Paula just noted, the Supreme Court in late June of 2019 really essentially said that the federal courts are not going to get involved in trying to determine cases of what they consider to be partisan political map making. And so that's really limited communities' abilities to fight some of this gerrymandering. And so this most recent ruling in Alabama has really alarmed a lot of people who pay attention to this across the country, that it may start to erode the one area that is left to try to stop racial gerrymandering. That is, you know, this sort of packing and cracking of minority communities to suppress their political power and their ability to elect someone of their own choosing when they have the numbers to do so. And so that is very much a concern of a lot of us. You know, the Supreme Court seems to be moving in the direction of really messing with that Voting Rights Act Section 2 part of the law.
Yeah, and there's been, I was looking at the cases that are going on now. And a good reference for this is, by the way, the Brennan Center. They had kind of a detailed list of what the current cases were. And there's a case in Michigan, the Detroit Caucus versus the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. And the plaintiffs contended that the new state house map enacted by Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission is a partisan gerrymandering in violation of Michigan Constitution. But the court found that the commission's racial block voting analysis indicated that in the absence of districts that were 50% or more minority, a sufficient number of white voters have supported Black preferred candidates, such that Black voters have equal opportunity to elect representatives of their choice. So they're kind of going in that direction. And the same thing was reasoning for Illinois too, that the court said in that East St. Louis area that there's evidence that there's crossover voting. So there isn't like the necessity to have, you know, a Black minority district or a Latino minority district. So it seems to be what Madeleine said, that also said this, but it's a concern.
Mm-hmm. I'm learning a lot. Thank you. You're the experts. So why are congressional districts so spread out? Some of them don't seem to make sense and appear to be really difficult to represent. Madeleine, would you start on that one?
Sure. So let me share my screen again and show you that congressional map once more. You can see your area up around Rockford here is look at this district that goes all the way from the top of the state down to curves all around and then goes down into central Illinois. I pointed out this district here that kind of snakes down and west. And essentially what this is doing is maximizing the ability for the Democratic Party, which happens to be a supermajority in the state of Illinois right now, to elect as many members of Congress as they hope they can. And so I think this one district that I'm hovering over now is the best example of that, because it is essentially, stringing together through this long, thin line, a number of urban communities where there tend to be more people who vote Democratic, to pack them together to create an ability to elect a Democrat. So this, includes a big chunk of the Champaign-Urbana area, Decatur, Springfield, and goes all the way down and picks up St. Louis. Obviously, those are all urban centers, which tend to have more Democratic voters than some of these rural areas in this purple district around it. So that's why they spread them out. But I have to tell you, this is, in all the years I've been paying attention to redistricting, this is one of the crazier looking congressional maps that I can recall, with this district that just runs from one end of the state to the other. And some of these other districts that I just pointed out, some of these, both of these that come into the Rockford area, just look a little, it's hard to argue that this is compact. And in fact, other nonpartisan expert sources like the Princeton Gerrymandering Project graded this an F for compactness.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention that we talked a little bit about Illinois losing population, and most the metropolitan area gained about 150,000 people, but the downstate area lost about 170,000 people. So that also causes a spreading out of those districts a little bit more, just because of the shift in population and the downstate lost population, and just makes those districts larger. Oh, you're on mute, Kathy.
Thank you. If anybody else encounters the norovirus, find out how to get in touch with me. I'll give you my husband's broth recipe, but I have to keep going on mute so I don't cough into the mic. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So you got at some of this next question. So
Right.
we did, Paula, Illinois lose a congressional seat, but what will that mean for Illinois? Are we going to lose clout in Washington? And if we do, what might that mean for the state?
Yeah, well, hopefully Madeleine can add to this, because I did mention, we lost population, and it was kind of interesting to look at where the gains in seats were more in like the South and the Northwest, and the East and Midwest plus California lost some seats. And also we've been kind of losing congressional seats since 1950. Our high was 26 in 1950, and we've lost about 1 seat every 10 years. So I would say, compared to the rest of the country, we are losing influence, and we're losing electoral influence. And I don't know what you can do other than just speak out, and let your voice be heard, and make sure you talk to your legislators and are educated on issues and speak out.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that Illinois actually didn't lose as much population as had been predicted, but it was still enough, because we only have 435 seats in the US House, and the population gains were stronger elsewhere. So as a result of that, we did lose the 1 seat. The good news is that a lot of people were very, very worried that we were going to lose 2 seats, and we only lost 1. But as Paula noted, this has been the case that we've lost a seat every 10 years since the 1950s. And that's, possibly going to continue unless people start moving back here.
Okay, thank you. Sticking with you, maybe Madeleine, with the elimination of a congressional district, the congressional representation for Winnebago and Boone County citizens formerly represented by the 16th will have new representation, and they'll be split between the newly configured 16th and the 11th. Hope everyone is following. What could this mean for area voters?
Well, it means they've got some homework to do. A whole lot of homework, actually, because it seems like there are a ton of candidates running for these seats or getting ready to run for these seats. So candidates right now are out trying to collect voter signatures, and enough of them of valid voter signatures of people who live in those districts so that they can qualify to get on the June 28th primary ballot. And as is typical after a redistricting, there are a bunch of candidates throwing their hats in the ring and seeking these offices, which is a good, healthy thing, of course, but it means that, you know, for everybody, not just in the congressional districts, but for their state House and state Senate districts and every other representative government, including the local governments, because they all have to redistrict after the census. Everyone watching this could be in a different district than they were previously, or at least some different districts than they were in previously. And so it's obviously important to pay attention before you go vote. Make sure you know which races are going to be on your ballot, and do the research and the homework with local media and through the League of Women Voters and the resources that they provide and others provide that you can rely on and know are factual and you know, nonpartisan, to understand where those different candidates, which ones are running for which of those seats, and where they stand on the issues that are of concern to you. Make sure that you do your homework and cast an informed vote.
Yeah, I reiterate what Madeleine said, and not only you're adding the 11th district, but neither representative in the 16th district, Adam Kinzinger, nor the 17th, Jerry Bustos, are running for re-election. So I guess it's a real change, and it's a real opportunity. And as Madeleine said, also look at your other districts. I know I'm in Cook County, and my Cook County representative district changed, and I was really surprised to see that because it's been stable. I've been here 30 years, you know, so there's just a lot of changes and a lot to look for, but exciting to see who's out there and what's new.
Yeah, I think with Kinzinger and Bustos in this area in particular, that really is what's driving a lot of these new candidates and new faces that we're not familiar with. And so it requires a lot more work and effort on the part of voters to understand who's going to be on the ballot and what they stand for.
Phew. So, so paying attention, obviously. And I'll say that those of you who are on this call, and we know that, of course, many more will be watching this video who didn't have the middle of a Sunday afternoon available. I hope you'll share this around so that people have an opportunity to get a little bit more of a heads up as well about what's going on. It's a lot to digest. So, Paula, what tools do voters have to ensure that maps are drawn fairly in the future? Like what are best practices? Has the ship sailed for now? And what are best practices going forward?
Well, I said, yeah, we have to look for the future here because our maps are decided now. But where congressional and legislative maps are drawn by independent commissions, voters are likely to get fairer drawn maps. Madeleine mentioned the Princeton Gerrymandering Project, and they rate maps according to partisan fairness, competitiveness, and compactness. So for the 2021 congressional maps, Illinois received an overall grade of F. The congressional maps.
And F doesn't stand for fair in that case.
Back to school grading.
Yes.
So the maps drawn by independent commissions in Arizona, Colorado, and Michigan received overall grades of A. And it's a more mixed bag where there is legislative control of drawing maps. For example, Maryland, Texas, and New York received Fs, but Pennsylvania received a B and Georgia a C. So not having a commission doesn't necessarily mean that the maps aren't drawn fairly, but it's just more likely to get better maps if you have an independent redistricting commission. So there are several bills in Congress that deal with voting rights. The most recent ones are the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. The Voting Rights Advancement Act would modernize and revitalize the Voting Rights Act of 1965, strengthening legal protections against discriminatory voting policies and practices. And the Freedom to Vote Act would set national standards to protect voting access, counter election sabotage, end partisan redistricting, and fix our broken campaign finance system. Tall order here, but that's what it was in the bills. An earlier version of the Voting Rights Act, the For the People Act, banned partisan gerrymandering for congressional redistricting and required states to establish an independent redistricting commission to draw future maps. The Freedom to Vote Act does not include the independent commission requirement, but it retains and strengthens the general ban on partisan gerrymandering with specific court enforceable standards, including a requirement that states use computer modeling to assess fairness of maps and stronger protections for communities of color. So, my advice is when the opportunity comes up is to work for a system that has an independent commission or something of that sort. And also some state constitutions state that you can't have partisan gerrymandering, and there is no clause in the Illinois Constitution that would indicate that.
So Paula, I have to confess, I have not read every detail of the latest version of those laws or proposed laws that you just mentioned, but they would only apply to congressional districts, is that correct?
Right, because it's a federal law, it would only apply to the congressional districts.
Right.
Although I assume that under the Voting Rights Enhancement Act that that kind of strengthens the 1965 Voting Rights Act, that those legal protections would apply to other elections. But the gerrymandering part would only be congressional elections.
And so Kathy, in Illinois, we've for the past several years have tried and failed to push forward the possibility of an independent redistricting commission for Illinois. Change Illinois and the League of Women Voters of Illinois have endorsed several efforts over the years. They both have tried to collect enough voter signatures to get a question on the ballot asking people if they want to have a constitutional amendment to introduce independent redistricting commissions here. They have both failed and been turned away by the state Supreme Court. We suspect that that's really not a viable path anymore unless the makeup of the Supreme Court changes in Illinois, and there will be Supreme Court races that are going to be very competitive in the June primary. So that's another important thing for voters to educate themselves about and pay attention to. And so we've been trying in the past several most recent years to get the legislators themselves to approve an independent redistricting commission through the Fair Map Amendment, and have not succeeded at that. Obviously, the Democratic supermajority, just as the Republicans did in 1990, pushed ahead with partisan gerrymandering of these maps that we now have for the next 10 years.
Well, it bears repeating and emphasizing, thank you, that this is a, both and situation, but each party seems when they get in power to do this. We've seen it in our own state. We see it across the country. I am learning so much. I have to say, I shouldn't have been shocked. It was naive of me, but I was, to realize that it goes state by state, and that if something were racial gerrymandering, it might be thrown out. But in Illinois, partisan gerrymandering, just like we drew it so we can stay in power, is perfectly okay. I did not realize that. I did not realize that. So how can voters, and we've got some questions coming in the chat as well that I want to get to, but how can voters become involved in ensuring fair maps in the future?
I would say just start by bringing up the topic wherever you can. I mean, where there's candidates debate this year, if you have an opportunity to ask a question about it. That's just, one place to start. Contact your legislators when we have action alerts. And also this next year is going to be a time where we kind of reassess what's going on and look what happened in other states, what their best practices were, and how the map drawing process went. So you can send an email to issues@lwvil.org, and we have a redistricting Google group. And as we get a group together that can work with the league and work with Change Illinois and our Illinois Redistricting Collaborative, we'd love to have people come work on that, because it's important, and it's something that, we just redistricted, but we have to start again now to make changes. Otherwise, we won't have them 10 years from now.
So Kathy, as Paula said, we, Change Illinois, is a nonpartisan nonprofit, just like the League of Women Voters of Illinois, and we help lead this thing that Paula has referred to called the Illinois Redistricting Collaborative, which has a lot of different community groups and organizations that pay attention to gerrymandering and fair maps, and try to promote independent redistricting. So of course, in addition to the group that Paula mentioned that everyone should sign up for and join, I also encourage everyone to check out our website, changeil.org. You'll find some links there that are very helpful. One, for instance, might not be up to date just yet with these new maps, but you can type in your address and see who your officials are and how to reach them. We also have an email sign-up list there that you can add your email to and get our emails on a regular basis. And we will, of course, keep you informed on what's going on with mapping and gerrymandering and redistricting in Illinois. We're going to do as many events like this today as we possibly can, and also importantly, get around the state as best we can during a pandemic and listen to what people have to say about this topic, to kind of assess how to go forward from here, and see if we can also enlist some professional research help to assess whether there may be some paths out there that we haven't tried yet to try to improve redistricting in Illinois. The Illinois Constitution does say that we have a right to fair and free elections. But when something like this happens with these maps, it certainly doesn't always feel very fair or free. And so we've got to all join forces and rise up to try to change that.
Yes, thank you. I certainly am among hundreds and probably thousands of league members who several times in the last years have gone around with our little clipboards and gotten signatures to get fair maps on the ballot, etc. It's just hard. It's hard to pay attention. Everybody's, we're all busy. right now during the pandemic, of course, people have got other things that are front of mind. And so I guess it's incumbent on all of us to try to get this front of mind within our own groups as well, so that people pay attention and we can maybe have changes 10 years from now. Thank you. I'm going to take some questions out of the chat area, and if I'm missing any, but we're done at 3 o'clock, we're out of here, but but I want to get as many questions addressed as I can. And perhaps one of you knows the answer to this, and it might depend on counties. When will county clerks issue new voter registration cards? Anybody know?
Well, so they're all very busy right now, trying to figure out these new maps. And if you think about it, it's a huge undertaking because they have to literally, take every address in their jurisdictions and figure out which, congressional district that address is in, which state house district that address is in, which Senate district that address is in, and all the other local representative governments. They're working on redoing all of that right now, and then they should be getting out not the new cards that tell you which numbers you're in and which districts you're in. I usually get mine about a month or so before election day, which we don't really have an election day anymore with early voting and the ability to mail in our ballots now, but it's usually around that time. So I'm sure everybody will, get those by then. But if you want to get a head start, I would say there's usually probably information you can find now on the State Board of Elections website. If you just Google Illinois State Board of Elections, there will be some resources there. And if you Google Illinois Senate redistricting or Illinois House redistricting, you can find these maps that I've shared on screen this afternoon, and zoom in as much as you'd like to see where you think what new districts you might be in.
Yeah, and if you're going to vote in person, I think you have to pay attention to the precincts, because the precincts
Right.
could change. Sometimes I know around here, they like to try and put one state representative district in one precinct and not have a split precinct. So those things could also change. And I'm not sure, there was some controversy as when those were going to change. So they might change. There might be different now for the primary and in the fall. So it's just something else to look out for.
Something to keep an eye on, something to tell your friends. Now that you know all this, you're not going to unknow it. And so be sure you talk it up, that, make sure everybody that in your orbit knows that things are changing. I see in the chat that some people have already gotten their voter registration cards. So I don't suppose we want to call out any counties pro or con how that's going, but I know that in my town, we've got some very understaffed city positions now, and during the pandemic, there's just so much going on. So paying attention.
Kathy, if I can just jump in, you just touched on one of the simplest but most important things that everyone listening to this can do, and that is educate your family, educate your friends, educate your neighbors. Not just about all of these new districts, but about the corrosive effects of gerrymandering and the need for independent redistricting, and for all of us to get involved. There's a lot of discussion and concern about how polarized we are as a nation right now. And in my view, this is one of the base factors that contributes to that polarization. When, or from state to state to state, districts are drawn in a very partisan way that just contributes to us ending up with representatives who tend to be more on the extremes of both parties.
Oh, You said that so nice and calmly. I was about to say, we need to get everybody angry about the fact that partisan gerrymandering is completely legal in this state, that we're just accepting that it's okay for the people in power to try to stay in power, as it is in other places, as it has happened. So then I've got a question.
It's voter suppression, Kathy, plain and simple. It is voter suppression, and it's legal voter suppression that starts at the foundation of our government. And if we don't fix that, then we're going to be in trouble for a long time to come. So it really is important for everybody to spread the word that they need to care about this.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all read somewhere words to the effect of the people should be choosing their politicians. The politicians should not be choosing their voters. So let me pull another one out of the chat that might, I know that there are strong opinions in many directions on this. Do you think either of you, do you have opinions on ranked choice voting and whether something like that might reduce the power of the parties and allow more participation of independents? Would it have any effect on the sort of, could it in the future have any effect on the gerrymandering?
Well, I don't know if it'll have effect on gerrymandering, but it certainly gives people a choice of part of the problems with having, districts that are so gerrymandering and are so one party or the other is that the people that you get running are possibly towards, not towards the middle where they would compromise, but towards the ends of the spectrum. So if you have ranked choice voting, then it's probably more possible that you might come out with candidates that are more in the middle. And I know that the State League has a committee right now that is looking at ranked choice voting. So again, if you email the people at issues@LWV-IL.org, goes to the issues committee chair and they can get you to the right person.
Yeah, I'm very fascinated by ranked choice voting and think that it might be time to give it a try. We don't, as an organization, have a position on it at Change Illinois just yet, but I know it's a growing movement. It's being tried in some other states. Alaska just approved some form of it. There are other organizations that are working on different forms of it, and it might be time to give it a try. There are instances, I did have somebody tell me once that, there was an extreme candidate running in a district in Chicago, and there was some concern that ranked choice voting would have allowed that person to be elected. That gives me a little bit of pause, but I think it's something that we all ought to study some more.
So I've popped the email address. By the way, so issues, if you've got questions about this, you can send it to Paula's Issues Committee, and when we all so blithely say LWV-IL.org, that stands for League of Women Voters of Illinois.org, if you've got questions or if you want to get involved. And also, the League is looking at the issue of ranked voting, but does not have a position on it. Like Change Illinois, it's something interesting that's being that is being researched. There's a question here, and I know that there are several websites that do this. Does somebody on the call, smarter than I and better at quickly researching, have one of the links where you put in your address and it gives you the districts? I think Vote 411 does that. There are some others, but if any of us panelists or background folks have that, that would be helpful to people. So we have a question from someone who is getting involved in politics now, a new political figure. How does the League work with politicians? Paula, maybe you'd talk a little bit about that for us, and
Okay.
because we do all sorts of things.
Yeah, well, we're nonpartisan, so we don't endorse any candidates, but we do love to educate the public. So we try to have candidates forums where there's contests, and that's a good way to get out and be known among the public. Certainly people that are interested will come out, and especially this year where there's a lot of changes in districts, there's a lot of interest among the public and among voters as to what's going on and who the new people are that are running for office.
Right. So I think I'll take this last question here and I will apply it also to Change Illinois. The question says, how does the League of Women Voters of Greater Rockford, but let's say League of Women Voters and Change Illinois, use social media to communicate, inform, and educate the generations that have no idea about this redistricting process? Where should people be looking, and where could they be directing their friends, neighbors, and family?
Well, Change Illinois definitely has a presence on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram and LinkedIn. So if you just go to the search and type in Change Illinois, you should be able to find us. I do need to issue a warning that unfortunately there's a Twitter handle that's very similar to ours that actually spells out, I think it's at Change Illinois, and it's run by someone who is definitely partisan. So that's not the right one. If you find that one, it's at Change IL for us on Twitter. We absolutely make full use of that to try to reach all kinds of different voters and educate them about all of this and try to help them understand how important it is. And so those also are all options for people to stay in touch with us, and we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, and I know the league has a communications committee that has been, working on all sorts of communications, and we do have Facebook page and Twitter. And I know recently we got an email that where we could post a message to, get people out to vote, and talked about we have an Illinois voters guide, and that's a good place to go for information.
So thank you. So everyone, and tell your friends and neighbors, get out the megaphone. So look for both Change Illinois and the League of Women Voters, State League, and also League of Women Voters of Greater Rockford, if that's where you are. And then the thing is, though, if you're on social media, you have to like the page, you have to get on their Twitter, etc. And then things will start showing up for you. And also look at the websites, because typically there will be something in the front there, something that you can be interested in, and consider joining organizations that are going to, strength in numbers. So thank you.
Don't forget to share if you find a great post.
Good idea.
Retweet it or share it in addition to liking it. Yeah,
exactly right. In that way, your own friends and family will become informed as well. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back to Claire McIntyre. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention and your great questions. And thanks to Paula and Madeleine for their deep research into this, their deep dive, and their Sunday afternoon.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate it. You guys have done my work for me. You've pretty much given all the information I was going to give at the end. We did have a question from somebody that wanted to know, how do I find out about candidates? And as you can see in the left side of my screen, there is the IllinoisVoterGuide.org. That is an online resource. It will have candidate profile information in there. We, as a league, the League of Women Voters Greater Rockford, will also be doing candidate forums. We will also be producing a candidate profile guide, both in Spanish and English, that you can access on our website, LWV-GR.org. And in paper, we will have a paper copy of it as well. And if you go to our website and contact us, we'll let you know how to get this information as it becomes available. I would like to thank you for attending today, to all of you. And I would really, really like to thank our excellent panelists, Madeleine Doubek and Paula Lawson and Kathy Tate-Brandish, our moderator. I thought it was an excellent presentation. I hope you all came away feeling very informed when it was done. As you can see, we do have a list of websites up that you can copy down or get from us off of our website. And I would encourage you to join the league. We are as Paula mentioned, we are non-partisan and we are inclusive and we welcome all. If you believe voting rights are important, that democracy is important, please get involved. And for heaven's sakes, vote. I'm sure everybody who's on here is a voter. Encourage your kids to vote, your friends to vote, your neighbors to vote, your colleagues to vote. Get involved. Thank you for coming. Have an absolutely wonderful rest of your afternoon. And please always remember that democracy is not a spectator sport. It needs your involvement. Thanks a lot for coming.